tingling.
What does the Catholic Church say about euthanasia and assisted suicide? And how does this oppose what Democrats have to say about this issue?
These are excellent questions and also very valid concerns. Hello everyone, I'm Captain Catholic, and I hope I'm able to address these important questions of yours. This video is actually part of a larger series discussing various political issues. Often, people will ask the question, should Catholics be Republicans or Democrats? Obviously, the answer to that question is that Catholics shouldn't be either Democrats or Republicans. This is because the Catholic Church has many strong viewpoints that oppose the views of both Democrats and Republicans, depending on the issue. So throughout this series, we'll be taking a look at how the views of the Catholic Church oppose each political party on selected issues. Specifically, throughout this series, we'll look at how the Catholic Church opposes the Republican Party on the issues of war and military spending, gun control, capitalism and the role of the government in helping the poor, immigration, and climate change. We'll also be taking a look at how the views of the Catholic Church oppose the Democratic Party on the issues of abortion, stem cell research, euthanasia, and religious freedom. This particular video will focus on euthanasia and assisted suicide. So, let's begin. Next up, let's focus on how the Catholic Church's views on assisted suicide and euthanasia oppose the Democratic Party's views on these issues. First, let's take a look at a quote from the Catholic Church. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states, "Those whose lives are diminished or weakened deserve special respect. Sick or handicapped persons should be helped to lead lives as normal as possible." Whatever its motives and means, direct euthanasia consists in putting an end to the lives of handicapped, sick, or dying persons. It is morally unacceptable.
But I don't get it. What's wrong with euthanasia? If a dying person asks to be killed, isn't ending their life the merciful thing to do?
Certainly, none of us want to see a loved one suffer or be in pain. This can be an incredibly hard thing to watch. However, this does not mean that assisting your loved one in ending their life is the merciful thing to do. Let's take a look at a few quotes from the Catholic Church explaining why assisted suicide and euthanasia are not merciful actions. St. Pope John Paul II has stated, "To concur with the intention of another person to commit suicide and to help in carrying it out through so-called assisted suicide means to cooperate in, and at times to be the actual perpetrator of, an injustice which can never be excused, even if it is requested. Even when not motivated by a selfish refusal to be burdened with the life of someone who is suffering, euthanasia must be called a false mercy, and indeed a disturbing perversion of mercy. True compassion leads to sharing another's pain. It does not kill the person whose suffering we cannot bear. Moreover, the act of euthanasia appears all the more perverse if it is carried out by those, like relatives, who are supposed to treat a family member with patience and love, or by those, such as doctors, who, by virtue of their specific profession, are supposed to care for the sick person, even in the most painful terminal stages. Furthermore, St. Pope John Paul II has stated, at the other end of life's spectrum, men and women find themselves facing the mystery of death, when the prevailing tendency is to value life only to the extent that it brings pleasure and well-being. Suffering seems like an unbearable setback, something from which one must be freed at all costs. Death is considered senseless if it suddenly interrupts a life still open to a future of new and interesting experiences. But it becomes a rightful liberation once life is held to be no longer meaningful because it is filled with pain and inexorably doomed to even greater suffering. In this context, the temptation grows to have recourse to euthanasia, that is, to take control of death and bring it about before its time, gently ending one's own life or the life of others. In reality, what might seem logical and humane, when looked at more closely, is seen to be senseless and inhumane. Here, we are faced with one of the more alarming symptoms of the culture of death, which is advancing above all in prosperous societies, marked by an attitude of excessive preoccupation with efficiency, and which sees the growing number of elderly and disabled people as intolerable and too burdensome. These people are very often isolated by their families and by society, which are organized almost exclusively on the basis of criteria of productive efficiency, according to which a hopelessly impaired life no longer has any value. So essentially, the Catholic Church views euthanasia as being a false act of mercy. While it is difficult to watch a loved one suffer, family members should patiently and lovingly share the suffering of a loved one, not intentionally murder the loved one. There is nothing loving or merciful about killing a loved one, regardless of the circumstances. Now, sometimes this is very easy for us to see. For example, if a child came to a mother with a scraped knee and said, "Mommy, Mommy, it hurts so bad," hopefully, the mother wouldn't turn around and say, "Oh, honey, I don't want to see you in pain. Do you want Mommy to end your pain? Yes? All right then, stand in front of Mommy's car so I can run you over and flatten you like the smiley-faced pancakes I baked for you this morning." So in this example, that kid's knee is going to hurt for a while, regardless of what the mother does. But obviously, the job of the mother is to help her child through the pain, not to end her child's pain at all costs. So just because a loved one is in pain does not mean that we need to take away their pain at all costs. Instead, the job of a loved one is to protect, nourish, and help their loved ones, no matter what the circumstances are. Killing your loved one is never loving or merciful. It's murder. And who wants to be responsible for the murder of your loved one? Obviously, my example of the kid with a scraped knee is a very different scenario than an elderly person on their deathbed. However, this doesn't change the fact that in both situations, killing your loved one would in fact be just that, murdering your loved one.
Yeah, that's great and everything, but why does euthanasia need to be illegal? Shouldn't we just leave it up to every individual to decide what they want to do?
That's a great question. Let's take a look at a quote from the Catholic Church to see why euthanasia should be illegal. St. Pope John Paul II has stated, "Laws which legitimize the direct killing of innocent human beings through abortion or euthanasia are in complete opposition to the inviolable right to life proper to every individual. They thus deny the equality of everyone before the law." It might be objected that such is not the case in euthanasia when it is requested with full awareness by the person involved. But any state which made such a request legitimate and authorized it to be carried out would be legalizing a case of suicide murder, contrary to the fundamental principles of absolute respect for life and of the protection of every innocent life. In this way, the state contributes to lessening respect for life and opens the door to ways of acting which are destructive of trust in relations between people. Laws which authorize and promote abortion and euthanasia are therefore radically opposed not only to the good of the individual, but also to the common good. Disregard for the right to life, precisely because it leads to the killing of the person whom society exists to serve, is what most directly conflicts with the possibility of achieving the common good. Essentially, the Catholic Church views government intervention as being necessary to ensure that all human life is protected. There are many ways in which the government does this. As I've mentioned previously, the Catholic Church advocates for the government to protect life through anti-poverty programs, through ensuring that all citizens have health care, through gun laws that keep citizens safe, and so on. Likewise, to protect life, the government must ensure that direct murder is never legalized. Since euthanasia literally is direct murder, it needs to stay illegal in order to protect and promote human life. Now let's take a look at a concrete example of when the Catholic Church's views on assisted suicide and euthanasia oppose the Democratic Party's views on these issues. Recently, legislation was introduced in the state of California to make assisted suicide legal. Specifically, this legislation proposed to allow physicians to provide lethal prescriptions to mentally competent adults who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. The title of this bill was Senate Bill 128, otherwise known as the End of Life Option Act. It was written and introduced by multiple Democratic state senators. The Catholic Archbishop of Los Angeles, Jose Gomez, immediately opposed Senate Bill 128. Here's what he had to say about it. The compassion that doctor-assisted suicide offers is hollow, and this legislation has dangerous implications for our state, especially for the poor and vulnerable. There is no denying that in California and nationwide, we face a public health crisis in the way we treat patients who are terminally ill and at the end of life. This is part of the reason why legislation similar to SB 128 is being introduced in states across the country. People are afraid that as they get older, they are going to be forced to suffer, unable to control their pain or illnesses. They are worried about becoming dependent or dying alone in a hospital, attached to all sorts of medical devices. These anxieties are natural and justified. We don't want this for ourselves, And we don't want this for the ones we love. But the answer to fear in a broken system is to fix the system and address the fears. It is not to kill the one who is afraid and suffering. It is a failure of public leadership and moral imagination to respond to human suffering by making it easier for people to kill themselves. Helping someone to die, even if that person asks for that help, is still killing. And killing is not compassion. It is killing. It is responding to the needs of our neighbors with indifference, with the cold comfort of death. The debate over doctor-assisted suicide is a distraction that is preventing us from confronting the real issues that we face in public health. The facts are that people are living longer today, which means we are treating more frail and elderly persons and more age-related illnesses like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Also, as a society, we are spending more and more of our healthcare resources treating people in the final months of their lives. We need to have an honest public conversation about these issues and what they mean for how we try to provide healthcare to all our people. Instead, SB 128 is pushing us into a quick fix solution that involves killing the people we find too difficult, too burdensome, or too expensive to care for. Senate Bill 128 actually did not pass initially. However, Democrats later reintroduced the bill as ABX 2-15 in a special session, which allowed them to bypass the standard committee hearings. The Democratic governor of California, Jerry Brown, then signed ABX 2-15 into law in October of 2015. This legalized assisted suicide in the state of California. The Catholic bishops of California immediately reacted to the passage of ABX 2-15. They of course fully opposed the law. Here's what they had to say in the following statement. The physician-assisted suicide legislation, ABX 2-15, signed today by Governor Brown, makes it legal to prescribe a lethal dose of drugs to assist terminally ill patients to take their own life. This law stands in direct contradiction to providing compassionate, quality care for those facing a terminal illness. All 48 Catholic hospitals in California provide excellent palliative care services, as all medical facilities for terminally ill patients should, but often do not. As Catholic bishops in California, we join hands with the disability rights groups, physicians, other healthcare professionals, and advocates for the elderly in opposing physician-assisted suicide as the wrong way to advance the human dignity for those facing a terminal illness. Pope Francis has warned us about our throwaway culture. Have we become so callous in protecting the sacredness of life that we easily approve of a physician handing over a lethal dose of drugs to someone to end their life at their most vulnerable moment when they most need to be cared for with love and attention? We are particularly disappointed that the very real concerns and risks posed to our brothers and sisters in vulnerable communities of the disabled and elderly have been consistently ignored by our state's elected officials. In a healthcare system grappling with constantly escalating costs, the elderly and disabled are in great peril now that assisted suicide has become legal. Application of such a law elsewhere shows that the option to offer the low-cost alternative of lethal drugs instead of proper medical care is a temptation not long resisted. For vulnerable people, this isn't compassion. There's nothing in this law that supports or promotes the common good. This bill does nothing to validate the lives of the vulnerable. If anything, this bill says just the opposite and only serves to increase their emotional burden. And it facilitates subtle but potent pressures on the elderly and the disabled to end their lives rather than become a financial or emotional burden on their children. Further along in their letter, the Catholic bishops of California also shared concerns that legalizing assisted suicide could negatively affect the poor. Essentially, wealthier people can afford palliative care, in which they're given painkillers over time so that they can spend the last of their days in as little pain as possible. However, this is extremely expensive to do, so people living in poverty really can't afford this option. Because of this, the bishops were concerned that legalizing assisted suicide would eventually force the poor to end their lives if they were diagnosed with a terminal illness, possibly against their own will. The Catholic bishops stated, millions of people on medi-cal are still not eligible for palliative or other end-of-life care. Instead, Lawmakers' solution to bringing down healthcare costs is to allow physicians to end a person's life. This will adversely affect the poor, as those with resources will always have access to palliative care. This is not compassion. It should be noted that St. Pope John Paul II also shared this concern, worrying that the legalization of euthanasia would make society even greedier and more money-hungry, valuing money more than the lives of vulnerable people. For this reason, he stated, "Euthanasia is sometimes justified by the utilitarian motive of avoiding costs which bring no return and which weigh heavily on society. Thus, it is proposed to eliminate malformed babies, the severely handicapped, the disabled, the elderly, especially when they are not self-sufficient, and the terminally ill." Archbishop Jose Gomez added to this concern, stating, "SB 128 is pushing us into a quick-fix solution that involves killing the people we find too difficult, too burdensome, or too expensive to care for. The ones who will suffer will be our poor, elderly, and handicapped neighbors, as well as those living in immigrant and minority communities. In a healthcare system driven by financial concerns, doctor-assisted suicide will not be a choice for these people. It will become their only option. In a state like California, where we have millions of people receiving government-subsidized healthcare, the cost pressures to choose suicide over treatment will become even more urgent. These concerns are not exaggerated. Already, we have the story from Oregon, where doctor-assisted suicide is legal. A woman was denied insurance coverage for cancer treatment and, in the same letter, was encouraged to take suicide pills, which the insurance company said it would pay for. This is an isolated instance, but it reflects the logic of doctor-assisted suicide. Once we start down this path, once we establish in law that some lives are not as valuable as others, not worth paying for, there will be no turning back.
All right, I get it. Don't pull the plug on Grandma.
Alright, so that just about ends our coverage on how the Catholic Church's views on euthanasia and assisted suicide oppose the views of Democrats on this issue. Be sure to check out any of the other videos in this series to see how the Catholic Church opposes each political party's views on other selected issues. So, what were your thoughts on the issues presented in this video? Please feel free to discuss your thoughts on these issues in the official Captain Catholic Facebook group, Captain Catholic Wants You. All people of goodwill are welcomed and encouraged to join the discussion, regardless of your religious or political views. Please just remember to be respectful and kind to all people in the group, regardless of whether or not they agree with your views. Also, feel free to check out the official Captain Catholic website, CaptainCatholic.com, for more videos. And before we go, just one final thought on this video. Please be aware that in this video, I was not attempting to give you a comprehensive summary of the Catholic Church's teachings on these issues. That would take hours, even more time than I wasted of yours already. So for time's sake, I tried to simply give you a few brief quotes that effectively highlighted some of the Catholic Church's teachings on these issues. Nevertheless, despite being brief, I'm sure these quotes show you how the Catholic Church directly and clearly opposes views held by both the Republican and Democratic parties. So hopefully you can use this video as a starting point to learn more about the Catholic Church's teachings on these issues in depth. Thank you so much for watching. And regardless of whatever your personal views may be, I will be sure to keep you in my prayers, and I wish you a fantastic day. Peace be with you.